Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sophia Nahlawi, Adult Services Associate at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Thank you for joining us for our November book chat at Pratt discussing books, art, and media that celebrate trans elders and creators. Just a reminder, all Pratt Library locations across the city are open at 50% capacity, so we hope to see you if you have not been back to visit us already. And so now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce Rahne Alexander and Lo Smith. Rahne Alexander is an intermedia artist and writer from Baltimore, Maryland. A 2021 graduate of the Intermedia+Digital Art MFA at UMBC, her works in video, performance, music, and painting have been exhibited across the US and around the world, including the Baltimore Museum of Art, Tephra Institute of Contemporary Art, and Mix NYC. She performs music as 50-Foot Woman and as the front woman of the rock band Santa Librada. Her writing has been anthologized in Love You, Resilience, and the Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology Take Me There, Trans and Genderqueer Erotica. Her OutWrite-award-winning chapbook of collected essays, Heretic to Housewife, was published by Neon Hemlock in 2019. Lo Smith serves the Enoch Pratt Free Library as the coordinator of digital equity and has over 9 years of experience in libraries. They hold a Master's of Library Science from Simmons University and was a member of the first all-trans panel session at the American Library Association annual conference in 2018. When they are not working to bridge the digital divide, they can be found browsing the stacks of the Central Library for Excellent Queer Literature and graphic novels. And so, without further ado, please welcome Rahne Alexander and Lo Smith to the stage.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. I like that I sort of just sound like a ghost just wandering the stacks of Central Library. If you need me, I'll just be there in the books.
I love that. I always wanted a guide while I'm in the stacks. Just show up and be like, hey, psst, check this one out.
I mean, you can ask most of the librarians. Secret thing you can do. You can wander up to any librarian at any desk here at the Pratt Library and ask them to wander through the stacks with you. Most of them will do it. It's really exciting.
That's a good
All right,
tip.
so I guess we should talk about ourselves for a minute.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So as Sophia said, my name is Lo. My pronouns are hanging out down there in my, pointing in the wrong direction, my banner. I identify as a trans person. I have for, pretty much all of my life. It's really a great thing that I get to participate in conversations like this at the Pratt, and that we're working to expand all of our art, literature, and media to make sure that we're including my community. My quick disclaimer is that while I identify as a trans masculine person, I am not here to speak for all trans masc folks. I am one single person with some niche interests in some specific books, media, and projects. I'm here to talk about that. But if you are interested in the greater sphere of transgender literature, our librarians in the social sciences and history departments, as well as our arts departments, are always out here to help you. And many of our fantastic librarians can help you find everything that you're looking for you and your community. So I always like to give that plug too. And if you're looking for recommendations from us while we're hanging out here, throw those in the questions and comments. Rahne and I will come at you hard with our recommendations.
Or maybe soft. I might come a little soft. Who knows? You never know.
I mean, to each their own.
Yeah. I do try to cultivate a femme presence. So, who knows? But I am a little bit hard femme. So you never know. I am Rahne Alexander. I'm a trans woman, and I've been out of the closet as trans since the very early 90s. It's hard to count. It's not that hard to count, but it's hard to count because this is why math is hard, because it starts getting to these numbers that seem scary. And then you get called things like trans elder, which I'm a little ambivalent. Well, not even ambivalent. I'm a little like, I don't love that term.
Tell me more about why trans elder is not something you want to vibe with.
Well, I think that I think that for women in particular, like putting age onto a thing helps to continue to invalidate an already like marginalized voice. And so there's an aspect of that that's there. You know, and I'm also, you know, there's that cliche about it, you're only being as old as you feel. And I don't really feel that terribly old. I also have this tendency to think that trans people, and again, I'm only speaking for myself, but I notice this a lot amongst other trans folks that I really vibe with. A lot of us really kind of live outside of time anyway, or at least outside of like, you know.
Such an accurate description, the concept of living outside of time. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and I just, you know, so we're all figuring these things out. And like, I've been struggling with, you know, with understanding myself as a trans person for, you know, well, 52 years now, because it was just my birthday. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Oh, are you a Scorpio?
I'm on paper, I'm a Libra, but I'm like Libra Scorpio cusp. I'm like right on there. So I got a lot of Scorpio on my chart, and I'll leave you to figure out what that means for.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I hope everyone who's observing our chat knows what a Scorpio is. But yeah, very honored to be here with a Scorpio. Then,
indeed, I'm pleased to be here because of it. So, but you know, so I really resist the term trans elder, even though like I know that I can, you know, I can bring a lot of experience to the table, and that's really one of the things that. You know, I'm trying to bring to the work that I'm doing now, especially the writing that I'm doing now, because so much has changed since I came out, you know?
Yeah. And I definitely think as someone who, and now here's my like age reveal, as someone who was born probably when you came out, possibly in the same year, it's an odd experience that now at the age of 30, I do identify as a trans elder because so many of our community members aren't ever as old as I am. And that's something that we think about on Trans Day of Remembrance, which is coming up soon. We are a nonlinear community, so our heritage is sort of, we don't often have parents and children the same way in families. We build our own families. And as a result, there are definitely people out there who would consider me to sort of be their parent in the trans community. And so to hear someone who is older than me and far wiser than me say, oh, I'm not a trans elder, and yet I'm sitting here going, kind of a trans elder. I think it definitely shows the different perspectives on like, what does it mean, and being a mentor or being an artist, or for me being a collector of information and a guide. And that's because that's what we do in librarianship, is we collect the information and then we guide you through it, versus creators like you who are responsible for all of the things that we are later then in charge of, which is so much fun. But I really like our difference in perspective, because it's true that, and also really particularly, we don't all think the same. And we all have very different concepts and ideas. But now I want to hear about your creations. Specifically, I know Sophia mentioned your recent publication. Please tell me more. I'm thrilled by this. Often we're talking about other people's work during book chats, but I rarely get to talk to an author and be like, tell me about your work.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to. I just happen to have a giant stack of my books right here. Woo, look at this.
Would anyone need one?
So this book right here, Heretic to Housewife, is a chapbook of personal essays and performance essays that was published by Neon Hemlock in 2019. I got that opportunity because I submitted to the OutWrite, that's OUTWRITE. This is a beautiful DC-based queer literary annual conference. And they were having a chapbook contest, and the prize was you get to have your book published. So I won in the nonfiction category that year in 2019, and got my book published. And it's just a short little collection of essays. I think there's 10 or 11 in there. And almost all of which had either been previously performed or had been published in some place, some usually an online place. And I realized as I was putting that manuscript together that like it actually does kind of cohere into a sort of linear biography, where I'm like, oh, this actually works as a collection somehow for me as an author. And like one of the things that is always important to me as an artist is that my work works for me more than it works for anybody else. If it doesn't please me, I don't want to put it out into the world. But anyway, so this is available directly from the publisher. And I don't know if we can drop a link into the chat here. I don't know that I've got the capability, but maybe we can pop that in there.
We've got fantastic people on the back end. Oh, there it is.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
There are wishes, their command. They make it happen.
Yeah, they're magic. I love the ghosts in the machine. So yeah, that was such a beautiful thing. And my favorite part about it, if I can tell you a little story about it, when Dave Ring, who's the publisher at Neon Hemlock, was starting to put the book together, he was like, well, what do you want as the cover? And I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea what to do as the cover. And, because this is a book which is like charting, like how I figure myself out, like, I came up as a radical feminist. Like this is how I made my splash into feminist understanding when I got into college in the late 80s. And, I realized very quickly that radical feminists, by and large, didn't really vibe with, trans women at all. So I had to figure out how to negotiate that particular thing. And I've been negotiating that for, 30 plus years now. But, deep down, I still really consider myself a radical feminist in the most.
I'll say definitely same, like the concepts of radical feminism, I'm keeping those for myself.
Yeah.
Should they be appropriated by people who do not believe in and support us? That's not our problem.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
similar to you, I definitely found some deep understanding in radical feminism, and I probably had a similar journey a few decades apart.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I went to bed thinking about, and so one of the people that were really transformed my thinking was a woman named Sonia Johnson, who the short version of her story is that she was a Mormon housewife who went on a campaign to support the Equal Rights Amendment and got excommunicated from the church. And then, she went on a larger political journey and became a radical feminist herself and, these kinds of things. And she wrote a memoir called Housewife to Heretic. Right. And the title of my book, which is also the title of one of the essays in here, is a reversal of that. So I'm heretic to housewife. And when, I went to bed thinking about what Dave had asked me about the cover, and I had one of those waking dreams. I have a lot of waking dreams. And I woke up the next morning thinking about a Labris. And I was washing a Labris in the kitchen sink, cleaning it, right? And so I sent this message to Dave, and I'm like, so I just had this idea that maybe, what if I'm doing this? And within a day, Dave had found a pink and blue Labris and took the photo. And so now we have this beautiful cover here of this person washing a Labris in this kitchen sink. So magic happens is really the end of that story.
Just the idea of pulling the concept of the cover from a waking dream. I'm looping this all back to the outside of time, possibly outside of space. Mm-hmm. And just sort of your own personal narrative on your own journey kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so cool. So with these original book chats back in the day, I used to host these. So for anybody watching, hi again, it's been a while. I used to always bring some books, and today I actually really only brought one book that I wanted to talk about. And then everything else I'm just sort of clapping back at rain with. But when we're talking about journeys and people, inspiration, and growth. Nevada by Imogene Binney is probably one of the major current pieces of trans literature that's out there. If you were a librarian who happened to join me for genre boot camp in, I believe it was 2017, I made all of the librarians in Baltimore County read this book with me. It was an adventure. It's a really fantastic book following this character, Maria, as she literally goes on a journey across America. Think a little bit Kerouacian. It's a little stream of consciousness. There's big adventures and strange people on her way to Nevada, which is her journey. And it just really, there are so many points in it in which everything that you expect does not happen. And I think that it really feels incredibly realistic, but it brings me back to the concepts of like identity and culture and elders. And she meets a character and sort of adopts them at one point in a Walmart. And I don't know why this is something that I feel is almost like a shared experience amongst people. But the idea of meeting someone in a strange place and just sort of connecting with them and then moving on was something that I just love bringing up about this title. And if you enjoy exploratory novels, if you enjoy something a little postmodern, maybe, I'm definitely recommending this to all of our listeners, watchers. Rahne, have you read it actually? I'm assuming you have.
Oh yeah, it's excellent. It's somewhere up in this.
It's somewhere in there. I will admit 2 of my copies are currently knocking around in the trunks of various friends in the city. If you're my friends and you have my copy, can I have it back? I have to lend that to someone else. But yeah, this is the one thing that I came prepared really to share because I think it's just the journey that some of us may all need to read, and the idea of sort of shaping together something into a journey. I love the way that Imogene kind of took various pieces of her life and shaped them into this fiction, where with your writing, you definitely take all of your nonfiction and then craft it back together into your own timeline. But that's my small piece of knowledge and my recommendation within Book Chat. If you are trans, there is the opportunity to download this book for free from the author. You can take a look at that online, but definitely also check it out from your local library. And if you aren't able to find it at your library, if you're watching this from somewhere else in the state, ask your librarians about Marina. It's an option to be able to borrow books from us, from Baltimore County, from other counties all around the state. We do lend them between library systems. So that's my casual plug to my favorite friends down in Interlibrary Loan. If you can't get what you're looking for, and I will actually say this about all pieces of trans literature, if your library doesn't have what you're looking for, ask for it. And we will find it for you, whether it means that we're going to buy it or we're going to borrow it from someone else. We all deserve to have all of the pieces of literature that we require in our collections, or at least at our fingertips. Shameless plug into Interlibrary Loan.
I love Interlibrary Loan. Oh.
They are the secret people that hold the entire library together. And when you meet them in real life, it's like meeting a celebrity.
Yes, I believe it. Yeah, Nevada is so good. And like, yeah, everybody should read that book, I think. Because it's, it's got that Americanness, that the American Road, American Road movie is what comes out of my mouth right now. But it's a road movie, right?
I mean, the American Road movie, I actually knew someone who was writing a thesis on the American Road movie, and the only thing we kept coming around to was I may have been because it was 2 trans people in a room, but we kept finding trans narratives in the American Road movie. All of these just sort of exploratory, interpersonal experiences. And I was like, is everything trans because we are? Or is there something else going on here? But yeah, just to compare it to the American Road movie, I think now anything can be trans if you need it to.
It's true. And I feel like that's one of the things that has been kind of underpinning all the work that I've done over the past however many years, which has been like, when I first came out, it was definitely the case where like, wow, trans stuff is like, whoa, it's beyond the pale. It's freaky. It was just like the kind of thing that was on Sally Jesse Raphael. and, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, it took a long time for me to recognize, like, just like the quotidianness of it, the normalcy of it, right? And how, like, you know, I think that a lot of us can really, I mean, I think anytime we've got a narrative where there's a cultural phenomenon which is being put up as like alien and distancing, you know, there's a reason, there's a political reason for that. And um, there's not so much difference. I mean, yeah, sure, trans has its own like specialties and everything, but like, I'm still human, right? I still have a lot more in common with any other random human than I do, say, you know, a planaria or a lizard, you know? So,
That's where I'm always so thrilled by the Matrix being something that so many of us related to, only for us then to find out that the Matrix was a trans narrative.
right.
And to have the Wachowski sisters come out and just straight up tell us, like, no, you were right. And I often, and this is where we do touch on Harry Potter, we had to, but the idea of growing up knowing that there's something different from you going on with you, only to then discover your community, that's such a trans narrative. I'm so disappointed by everything that has surrounded the author. But even just knowing how many of us grew up reading this book going, the first few chapters, it's all about when the glass disappears and the snake talks. We've all had those moments. And then when we meet all of our friends and go, oh, it all clicked. And trans narratives can be found anywhere, wherever we're connecting to the literature.
Absolutely. And I feel like, you know, I mean, J.K. Rowling did not invent that, hey, there's a secret world, you know, and you are actually a part of it. Like that's been a literary trope for a long, long, long time. And, you know, so many of us have needed that to survive. Not necessarily because we're trans, but yeah, definitely because we're trans, or because we're, you know, little gay, lesbian, queer children, you know, like those things are really, you know, important to hear as a child, I think.
Yeah, that reminder that like one day you will step into a room and everyone will be just a little bit more like you than you expected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, so now this is the part where I want to take us down a road to hear about one of the things that you wanted to talk about, and I'm skipping ahead because I'm excited, is the internet is not an archive. I thinking about when we talk about trans stories and trans narratives and our existence and community and coming together, and the internet and managing our own narratives and history, it all just sort of solidified for me. Yeah, when you shared this article, I was like, oh, that's a lot of feelings there.
Yeah. So this is rooted in an article that I wrote for Be More Art. I write for Be More Art from time to time. So, and I should have another article coming out pretty soon. So you can find me on the Be More Art site and find the link to that, or we can probably drop that link in the chat too. And, you know, I interviewed an archivist friend of mine, you know, because there's this drum that I like to beat that a lot of archivists like to beat, saying like, well, just because something on the internet exists doesn't mean it's going to be there forever. And, you know, so I'm always an advocate of like, back up your Facebook stuff, back up everything that you're putting out there, because once it's gone, it's gone. You know, several years ago, it was revealed that, you know, remember MySpace had all this music, right? And then people stopped using MySpace so much. And then lo and behold, drives died, and all this music, like the biggest music loss in history, basically, was just gone forever. All this, you know, independently recorded music, all this stuff that was just part of MySpace is gone.
MySpace was the home of the only, I think, surviving photos of me in full femme presentation. And I think for me, that was my loss, the music, but also the 3 photos of me that existed ever. Of who I used to be versus who I am now.
Yeah.
And to know that it's been lost forever is a very very disorienting feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think about this in terms of a trans narrative all the time because, I avoided photos for a lot of my early transition, because it was so awkward. It was my awkward teen years, just fast forwarded it, another decade or so. And, I just was like, I don't want photos of this. You know what I mean? And then there was a period where I just went through and I destroyed a lot of things too. And where I am now, I'm like, well, do I regret those decisions? I'm not entirely sure because I don't really know the magnitude of what I've lost in those, like in that avoidance and in that destruction. Right. But there's still kind of a part of me that wants to be able to go back and be like, wow, you know what? I wasn't the hideous mutant that I thought I was at the time. I was actually kind of maybe a little bit adorable and cute because, here's the secret. When we're 24, we're all adorable and cute, no matter how we feel.
I've had similar moments recently where I've looked back on documents and photos and previous writings. I was recently, a paper was finally published that I'd been interviewed for about gender identity, and the things I had to say from, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago when it was written were so different from now, but it was a window into who I was and how I felt about my own existence. And I'm so happy I've grown from that person. Yeah. But I'm glad that's immortalized for me to like see that growth. And I definitely think when I was reading The Internet is Not an Archive, and really thinking about us as a library, the Pratt Library, and our other projects, I was thinking about my friend Jody, who works just down the hall from me. I'm acting like everybody knows where I am in the building. But we have a project called Digital Maryland that's been kind of blowing up in the news recently for the documentation of the Black Lives Matter protest signs. But Digital Maryland is out here to help you go from your internet archive to a real archive. If you're an organization in Maryland that is looking to scan and create a digital repository for your materials, check them out. One of our goals is to make sure that we have sort of the correct storage for whatever it is. Is it art? Is it media? Is it mixed media? Is it protest signs? And one of the things that comes up a lot, and I was actually thinking about this recently, is the erasure of identity over history and how easy it is to not acknowledge who someone was if you get far enough away from it. And how important it is to do things like make sure that everything is backed up and make sure that there is no controversy or discussion and that there can't be any argument about who we have been, who we will be, who we were. And I think about a lot of the work that we do in libraries in research and thinking about what do we know about people and what's preserved. And here at the Pratt in our special collections, we have all kinds of magical things, but they don't tell the story, I think, that a lot of the people who owned them would have liked to have had told. And this actually now is linking to another thing that I wanted, another book, another narrative series that I wanted to bring up, which is the life of Charlie Parkhurst. And if you are a child of the 90s, you probably read some stuff about Charlie Parkhurst, and he was probably framed as the first woman to vote. Charlie Parkhurst was a trans man in the Wild West, and he at some point his identity and his narrative was taken and converted into this story of a woman hiding instead of as a man living his life. And I think a lot about what they often talk about, how shy and modest he was, and I'm not really sure how his narrative was taken from just this, oh yeah, there was a guy and he lived his life, and after he died, people became aware he was trans. But somehow he became this feature in a lot of children's literature, being uplifted as this courageous woman. And I think about the way that they describe him as modest and quiet and, professional, and yet riding out with his stagecoach and his sort of pistol in his lap type of thing. And if he could have chosen how he'd be remembered, I think he would have just chosen to be remembered, frankly, as himself, and not as a narrative that's been converted into something that he was not. And that is why it's so important to make sure that things are documented and controlled, not so much controlled, but, kept by our communities, written for us, by us, about us within the community, just because, it's not easy to steal a story like that, but it happens. And I think most of us have read a variety of things where those kinds of story thefts have taken place, especially if anybody is familiar with the book Melissa, that was accidentally on purpose called George for many years until the author firmly requested that it be retitled. And I think that's another example of why it's so important that we're having our own archives, we're creating our own art, and then maintaining it and controlling it and deciding what goes on the cover. Every little bit, because it's so important and it's so intentionally created.
Yeah. And, and I think that one of the things that I think is important to remember is that, we're always bringing our current context to the past, and I think any archivist, any historian, any academic in those fields, well, most of the time is going to be very cognizant of that. And when they talk about the ways that a person is spoken of and considered, but there is a demonstrable history of eliminating, the Hirschfeld Institute, the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute was completely destroyed. And this is an organization that had studied for many years, many decades, gay people, lesbian people, trans people, people who were,
that was the Queer Library of Alexandria.
Yeah,
like
it was.
When you hear librarians talk about the missing Library of Alexandria and how it breaks their heart, that is the Queer People's Library of Alexandria.
Yeah. And, and I'm sure that organization had its flaws, like I come to it with this idyllic idea of like what it was and everything. But, what's undeniable is that all this research was being done to understand these people that weren't fitting into this structure of, this heteronormative structure that was being foisted on the world through industrialization, through Western domination, through white supremacy, frankly. And, once you start thinking about the fact that like this structure of heteronormativity having that kind of power, this is something that was talked about in the writings of Michel Foucault and a lot of other people. You don't always have to get so like theory minded about all this stuff, but you do have to recognize like, when Charlie Parkhurst was doing what Charlie Parkhurst did, it didn't require a lot of this theoretical taxonomy. He was just like, I'm trying to live my life the way that I feel comfortable. And now I think it's very easy for us to say, oh, well, we can recognize him as what would be a trans man now. If we time traveled him here, gave him the books, what would he say? We don't know that. We'll never know that. We'll never know that about Joan of Arc. We'll never know that about, like all these other people that we could possibly name. But the truth of the matter is they live in a liminal space, and we do know that. And I live in a liminal space, and I know what that, I know what that has meant for me in my life.
Yeah. All right. So you brought more to share than I did today. So take us on more of a journey. What else have you got?
Well, let's see. Let me look at my little list here. I'm going to pull up a couple of books.
So what Rahne and I did to prepare is we each sort of came up with a bunch of books to contextualize this audience, and then sent them to each other, got very excited, nerded out very hard to prepare so that when we sit down and talk in front of you, we are exactly like this, looking at all these things and saying, but I wanted this one too, and to share, and this links into this. And it's a lot of fun to prepare to just talk about books and media.
It really is. So a couple of other books that you can get. Here's this book, Resilience, Surviving in the Face of Everything, I think is the subtitle. Yeah. And so this is a book that came out of a couple of years ago. I had the grand opportunity to join one of the very first trans women focused writing conferences that was up in New York. And, I got to meet a lot of other trans women artists who were just fantastic, and many of whom I'm still in contact with. And, one of the attendees there decided, like, I want to put together an anthology that really collects all of these amazing trans women into one volume. And I guess I should take back and say they're not necessarily all trans women identified trans feminine or assigned male at birth. AMAB is the abbreviation that often comes up there. So, but all living in that kind of realm. And so this beautiful little anthology, which is, also available on the internet, I saw the link up in the chat, is really well worth your time. There's essays all over the map. I wrote kind of a metaphorical essay about a Rubik's Cube, which may or may not be actually about genitals. Who knows? Like, I'll leave that up to you to decide if you get to read it. But there's a lot of really good essays in there. And I want to also talk about this beautiful book that I love, Take Me There, which was edited by my friend Tristan Taormino. And this is a book of trans and genderqueer erotica, and it's been out for a few years. It got a Lambda Literary Award, which is really cool. There's so many great artists and writers in here. Shauna Virago and Esper Bergman, just all kinds of great. Julia Serrano is in it, Ivan Coyote. This was one of those, I have a hard time writing fiction. I'm just going to say I have a hard time because my life always feels a little fictional. And so for me to take the reality and make it fiction is a little challenging. And I got to say, I love Tristan so much because she really helped me transform a story that I was struggling with and making it work ultimately as a piece of fiction. And I just want to give a shout out to all good editors out there. All writers can really benefit from a really, really, really good editor. So praise to the editors.
Yeah, definitely. I think often when we're talking about all of these different books that are pulled together by folks and curated, but not often enough do we acknowledge editors directly beyond just sort of that, like, thanks to my editor style of things. But you bring a good point when you talk about your multiple sort of contributions, the importance of an editor. Now, even just thinking about Resilience and having someone say, all right, we're going to edit this, we're going to sit down and do this. And then I'm looking at all of the contributors to Take Me There, and it's sort of a who's who of trans authors and writers and creators. Definitely think if anybody is familiar with this, the sphere, or is interested in getting started in reading some trans literature, Kate Bornstein, Esper Bergman, Julia Serrano, Sinclair Sexsmith, all of these are names where if you've been, a lot of them I think were probably some of the first trans people I ever felt connected to because I found them on the internet. This book was published in 2011. It's about a decade old, and I think it only come out about 2 or 3 years before. Didn't know a lot of people. So to read all of these names in a list just sort of feels like, it's almost like a yearbook to me of the people that have no idea who I am, but I think I absolutely know who they are. And they're a lot of the authors and writers and creators that I just connected with immediately as an 18-year-old alone in my dorm room who just heard the word genderqueer and was having a full-on meltdown over what that may hold. But to know that they are all pulled together in one place with a fantastic editor, I'm really excited to reread this, actually. I think it has been about 9 years since I last read Take Me There. this is the other problem with when I get to hang out in book chat is I just end up with a to be read pile that keeps growing. And if anyone's seen my desk in the library, it's just kind of covered in books right now. So if you see me adding more to it, it's Rain's fault. It's not mine. I can't help what I am suddenly influenced to read and reread and interlibrary loan. Maybe I'll take a little bit of responsibility, I guess.
It's hard though. It's hard to keep up. And, I'm like, whatever, I'm of a certain age. And I remember when, you couldn't find this stuff. I mean, I was prowling the stacks of my university in the late 80s and pulling out medical textbooks and like weird sociological studies to find community, which, you can imagine how that went. But, now there's so much literature that's happening, and there's just, in all genres and on all areas. And I've got a to read list. I mean, there's a bunch of books that I still have to buy right now that I'm planning on reading this fall, but, Rika.
There's only so much time in the day. And that is one of the things that I definitely have felt is the rise and the increase suddenly and finally in trans literature. And I feel like it's not so much that we're seeing a tidal wave, it's that we're finally getting to see all of the books, all of the movies, all of the music that's been in the back of the freezer for the last 100 and 200 years. And now it's all coming to the forefront. And now there is finally space for us, and space for us to make space for more different identities coming forward and presenting their art. And I've really been enjoying it, but it does mean that there's just so much to read and listen to and watch and learn about. From when I could type in transgender to the library catalog 9 years ago, when I stood at my first ever information desk, I think I got 2 things, to like this week where I was typing things in and I was like, oh yeah, Janet Mock's Redefining Realness is a canonical memoir that everyone reads, written in this conversational magazine tone, and I've gifted it to so many people who just loved it. It's not, it feels a little weird to no longer be edgy and radical, and that our art and our literature is no longer like, ooh, something you've got to like be a little bit quiet about, and instead it's like, oh yeah, we've got 5 of those books under the Christmas tree this year.
Yeah. No, this is, as I say, a great problem to have. Can I plug a couple of the books that are coming up that I really want to read?
Yes. Hit me with all of that to be read, because let's make my pile more problematic.
Okay, cool. I didn't put links up for these, so you're going to have to just take my word on these things. So Rika Aoki, I always have a hard time saying her name because I've got get my tongue in the way. Rika Aoki, Light from Uncommon Stars is an amazing science fiction book that's just been published. She's a wonderful poet as well, so I really highly recommend seeking out her poetry as well. And then Charlie Jane Anders, who was an author who just wrote on the TV series Why the Last Man, which you can find on FX, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is, adapted from a graphic novel. Her book Victories, she's got a bunch of things coming out, but her book Victories Greater Than Death is really exciting. I'm very much looking forward to that. My friend Casey Platt, who was one of the attendees at that Trans Women's Writers Conference, has a new book called A Dream of a Woman, which I'm really thrilled to read. She's got previous books, Little Fish, which is really fantastic as well. And then Matilda Bernstein Sycamore has a anthology that's just come out. And Matilda, she writes constantly. She's got another book out every other 10 minutes, it feels like. She's got this anthology coming out called Between Certain Death and a Possible Future, Queer Writing on Growing Up with the AIDS Crisis. And man, this is one of those books I wish that I had had time to contribute to, but the call was when I was in the middle of grad school and I was just like, I can't. So I still have some words to say about growing up in the midst of the 80s AIDS crisis. But I'm very excited to see that book come out, because I do think that there's so much dialogue that has not been had about trans politics and AIDS and HIV politics, especially in the 80s. You know, there's this amazing documentary that is just coming out. I think it's just playing the film festivals, of a trans woman named Connie Norman, who I highly recommend finding that film when it gets wider release, because she was an amazing California-based AIDS activist and a trans woman, and one of those figures that otherwise might be lost to history if we weren't making sure that films like this were being made.
That's so exciting. Looping back again, of course, to trans elders is just thinking about the AIDS crisis and how many of our elders we lost. I think this is something that people in my generation, 30-ish, we've really been talking about this recently, as we are reaching a point where we are becoming the adults in the room reluctantly. I was having a conversation with one of my staff members today where I had to realize I was the adult in the room. And then worse, we were both the adults in the room. But thinking about how we don't necessarily have as many role models. And this is where sort of art and writing and archives are so important, is how do we make sure that we have our role models? And now I'm even thinking about how COVID has disproportionately impacted particularly the queer and trans community. And just sort of my constant fear that we will lose those who are most important to us before we're able to capture all of their stories and learn from them and share all of the experiences that everyone deserves to share.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that got a little depressing. Sorry.
There's an agency to it, I mean, like
yeah,
we're at a place now where our stories are being prioritized by others, and I mean, and I think that's been one of the frustrations for a long time, where it's like, as trans people, as queer people, people with AIDS, like any of these marginalized communities who have a health crisis burgeoning, saying like, it's important that you listen to us, and it's important you pay attention to the story. And finally, as other people are adopting that ethos and awareness, they're jumping on board and they're like helping to support these stories. And, I mean, this is what community building is, right? This is the importance of it, because, trans liberation isn't going to happen until we've convinced everybody that we're worth being alive and being a part of the world.
Yeah. Whew. Just thinking about community and connection drew me back to another title that I wanted to talk about too, which is Female Husbands.
Oh yeah.
Trans history, because I have never read a book that felt so lonely. It's about people who were in relationships that could be considered same-sex, maybe considered people considered trans, identifying somewhere within the sphere of two assigned female at birth people in pursuing relationships. But there's something about the whole book, and if you're going to read it, make sure you're in a warm, cozy place emotionally, because each one of these figures who's profiled is alone. Well, they're in a relationship, they have their spouse, and that's sort of how they're framed, and sometimes they don't, but they don't appear to have any community or connection. And that was definitely something that really stood out to me, thinking about community and connection, was just like, this is a book about all of these figures who probably thought they were the only one, and that they were the only person like them and they were just going to get by. But yeah. Community is so important. And I think that especially as we went through sort of being isolated, not being able to go to events, not being able to connect with people in person, or even really having the capacity to do it on Zoom, over the last sort of year or so, we have gotten more and more isolated. And so connecting back to other things that we could find, to maybe not specifically even coming together as community, but finding art or literature or other small pieces to connect to, has been even more important. And just generally what we needed.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey, Sophia, welcome.
Whoa.
Your audio is coming through a little weird for me.
It's
Sorry.
very Peanut's parent right now.
Nope, you sound a little underwater. All right, Sophia is actually the person in the background who's been popping up those titles and doing a lot of that support for us. Let's see if we can hear them this time. Looks like we've lost Sophia. All right.
Technical difficulties.
They were coming to bring us our questions, but they can only throw the questions in the chat, and then we'll awkwardly both try to answer them together. One of us will read them.
Yes.
So now is the time for your questions. Now is the time to ask us for recommendations. What do you need, our lovely viewers, listeners, friends, community? What do you need from us? What can we recommend? What can we share? Sophia all right, they're popping in and out. I'm just always happy to see them join us.
I know, it's fun.
All right, let me see if I am getting an update on anything. Doop, doop, doop. Doop, doop. Looking for questions from anybody, truly. If you're on Facebook, you can throw them in the comments. If you are on, if you're joining us on YouTube, you can hit the comments there as well. Yeah, we're gonna just take some comments and questions and ask them of each other. Sophia's gonna send them over. Also, shout out to Benjamin, who's behind the scenes on this. I think here at the Pratt Library, there are a lot of people who work deep in the programs that you may not ever see or hear. So I like to say their names. Thank you to Sophia and Benjamin for putting this together. Thank you to our former adult program services person, Tracy Diamond, who has departed the scene, but she set this up before she left. And of course, shout out to the programs and outreach department who have been working tirelessly through the pandemic to convert everything that the Pratt would normally be doing in person to online. I'm sad that Rahne and I can't be like yelling this out in Central Hall and like holding up books to people in the back. And I would be throwing books into the crowd. Would you?
Yeah, of course. Just like, here, you get a book and you get a book and you get a book. I mean, if I can throw a little praise for the Pratt myself in here, I just, as an event organizer, as a career nonprofit person, I've just got to say, what a great organization that's really just done so much good stuff during this pandemic. It's been such a pleasure, and like, I don't know. I don't know how y'all do it, but the work is clear, and it's been so good to be a part of it as a Baltimorean.
Yeah. All right. We're looking for questions. Don't know if we're getting any yet.
Doesn't seem like we have any.
All right. Well, this is where I'm going to ask you, Rahne, what's one thing I have to read this week? It could be something that you've already shared, or it could be something else, but you have to give me a homework assignment. What is one thing I have to read?
Well, I would say that if you're up for it, one thing that I didn't talk about yet is my contribution to On Curating 42, which is this amazing art journal. And the guest editor for that issue, which is subtitled "What You Don't Know About AIDS Could Fill a Museum," asked me to write about, a few years ago, I had an exhibition at the Baltimore Museum of Art, which included some involvement from a local veteran of the LGBT activism organizational world named Lewis Hughes. And Lewis is just such an amazing person. He really was part of the fabric that started Chase Brexton, that started the GLCCB, that came out in, I believe, 1972. And he and I just developed this like beautiful friendship as a result of this exhibit. And I got to write a bit about him, because he's been part of like all of the longitudinal HIV studies that have gone on since HIV was identified, in the early 80s. And, and he's just he's a treasure of a human being, and just one of the many people who are here in Baltimore, who are still around, who have like helped like start a lot of things that a lot of us, I think, sometimes just take for granted, or, just don't even think about their origin point, to think about the fact that like, oh, there used to be a time when Chase Brixton didn't exist. There used to be a time when there was no GLCCB. So, so I did a little bit of work with him for that, and, got to profile him for this journal, which is available online just on -curating.org. And I think that's going to build out. I've done a couple of oral histories with him. I think we're going to continue to do some oral history projects going forward. So nothing that I'm quite able to talk about yet, but if you find me on the internet, at rahne.com, then, I can maybe tell you a little bit more about what projects are coming up with the oral history work that I'm doing.
Cool. We do have a question, it looks like.
Yes.
All right. So this is, were there any stories that didn't make your chapbook? What did you have to cut? What hard choices were made?
Wow, that's a manuscript editing challenge. That goes back a couple of years. I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were, but like I had really already decided that I wanted to keep it with previously published essays. Okay, one of the things that I did decide not to do for years in the early 2000s, I used to live in Santa Cruz, and then I picked up one day and just moved to Baltimore because Baltimore is better. And
yes, we have the Pratt, so
yes.
No offense, Santa Cruz Public Libraries, you're still cool.
That was good. Santa Cruz Public Libraries are amazing, and shout out to all of my librarian friends out there. Dewey Decibel, I love you. But when I moved, I still wrote a column for them for years because I really wanted to write, write about basically trans embodiment and sexual identity. So I had a column called Ars Erotica that I wrote for them for a couple of years, and I didn't really use any of those columns. I wrote there was one that I wrote about being misgendered by a philosophy professor at a philosophy conference that I was presenting at, which was very, that was a bummer, but so I'll eventually go back and look at those and see what's salvageable from that series of columns, because I wrote that for like 2 or 3 years, and I'm sure there's some good stuff that's still in there.
Oh, yeah, exciting. And then we've got another question. So are there any trans books or narratives you read recently that you would recommend, or that hit you right in the feels, or both? I'm going to have a pretty big confession here, which is that I tend to avoid some of the stronger trans narratives because having lived it, it can be a little hard to reread it. And I think that this is something that I've talked to quite a lot of my trans friends about, is that as much as I really enjoy a lot of the children's books that are coming out with coming out stories, it can feel a little raw sometimes and a little bit too close to home. So that's my big library confession. I read some, but I don't read them all.
It can be hard because you got to be steeled yourself, a little bit for it. Am I ready for delving into this?
Yeah.
I did read Tori Peters' Detransition Baby earlier this year, which a lot of people did as a national bestseller, as you might notice.
There it is, coming out everywhere, under every Christmas tree, in every other gift situation. Our books are everywhere.
Yeah. And that's really fantastic. It's a story of, a couple of trans women and reforming the family. I don't want to tell you what it is. Go look it up. It's actually a really good story. The other book that I want to plug a little bit is my friend Tyler Mendelson made this amazing book called Laurel. And this is like this beautiful deconstructed memoir collection of essays that was put out by a local press, Ink Press Productions. And I hope this book is still in print because it's really fantastic. Laurel by Tyler Mendelson.
Cool. Well, I think that was our last question. We have to always wrap this up to make room on our social for all the other fantastic things rolling out of the Pratt. Unless I am wrong, and I hardly ever am, there should be an evaluation or something that will pop up somewhere asking you to tell us a little bit more about how you feel about programming at the Pratt Library. Which leads me to another thing. There is a survey taking place in and around the Pratt about some of our programmatic aspects, some of our programs. If you happen to see some staff members in a branch asking you to take a survey, hit them up. You will get a cool piece of Pratt swag if you engage in that survey. You may get it in your email. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you would like from the Pratt Library. We want to know what you want in the way of programs. We want to know who we should be talking to if it's not just each other over here. So please let us know your thoughts. Let us know your feelings. And as always, feel free to reach out to the Pratt Library in any way, shape, and form. And have a lovely, is it still Wednesday? Gosh, we were talking about this before we went live, but this just feels like the longest week, but this has been the shortest hour. I've had such a great time talking with you, Rahne. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. Thank you. Thank everybody at the Pratt. Thanks for everybody who's watching.
All right, cool. And I think our tech people will just close us out. So thanks, y'all.
Bye.